Hey, peace and blessings, family. How y'all doing? I know I ain't been on here in a minute as myself. Constantly working and getting things back on track since being kind of off a little bit for the whole summer and down a little bit for the whole summer, right? But I am back and I'm kind of taking my time coming back. And what I found myself doing, I don't know how many people did this, but back in the days, uh, when people use VCIs and CDs, we would hear of a speaker, and then we would go out to the dude on the street or wherever, and we would get the latest video so that we could, listen to it and study it and gain some knowledge. And so basically, what I've been doing is a lot of that. And that's where I've heard of a lot of really awesome speakers um, that I grew up listening to, if you will. So um, I found this video. This was sent to me. I watch a lot of bloggers. One of them is Brother Wise is one. Another one is Devorion. That brother's like my favorite. So there's a lot of different brothers I listen to. So this one brother that I've been listening to, man, he's just giving me so much knowledge, and so I wanted to share this with y'all today. And so I'm gonna press play on this and listen. I'll come back in. I don't own the rights to any of this stuff, and this is Facebook, so who knows? But I'm gonna try to take it over to. I probably should have did this on the YouTube first, but it's all good. I'll share it over there somehow. But listen to this, y'all. I want y'all to listen. And let me just say this: one of the things I've learned about some black people. So I always say, if you're a foreign-born black person, if you're an immigrant black person, we're family, right? But sometimes you don't understand exactly what foundational Black Americans are talking about. So I don't think people there's no disrespect, but it's okay to respect lineages because I know I do. So even when I travel to other countries and they tell me about their lineage, I respect it. So what I loved about this elder that you're gonna listen to, he made a lot of sense and it explains some things because right now I'm dealing with being in an arena where we only can make money off of black death or black people doing bad. It's never about life, black life. It's really about black death and black destitute and black poverty. So listen to this, y'all. Listen to this.
So thank you for that. I wish we had some of the young interns here so they can get some lessons on how to, how to talk about your wife. But no, my wife is the most important person in my life, and she is an inspiration for all of this work. So I want for the next generation the benefit of what I have in my own home. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm going to talk to Bob, and then we're going to have a few panels, and then I'll come back towards the end of the day. But if you all would help me welcome one of my mentors, a person I've learned a tremendous amount from, Mr. Bob Woodson.
Okay, before we get to the dear elder brother statesman, right? Let me just say this. So this was sponsored by the Heritage Foundation, and one of the things I learned, because the one dude in the next clip is gonna say some things that make so much sense to why I see upper class, highly so-called educated black people throwing out racist and emotional terms for black people to be against something that may be for them. And so if you're a bit conservative, those type of black people don't really like you because it messes up their money flow. So just because you see the Heritage Foundation, don't think it's going to be something against black people because it's not even what you think. So, pay attention. Pay attention, family.
Is it on? Yeah. Is this on? Yeah. So Bob, we're gonna have a fireside chat. Yeah. There's no fireside, but we'll pretend that there is. All right. What I would like to do is for us to talk about the Moynihan report, not necessarily as much as what it said, while that's important, but really how it was received. And you were around, active in the civil rights movement when the report came out 60 years ago. So could you just say a little bit about how the report was received, particularly by civil rights groups and other people at that time in 1965?
Well, good. First of all, let me preface my remarks by saying don't hold him responsible for crazy stuff that I say. Don't blame him. But no, I was. This is a little background. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a small black low-income community in South Philadelphia. As I told people, we had holes in our shoes and two parents in our home. But also elderly people could walk safely without fear of being mugged, and children were not shot in their cribs.
Mm.
It was a solid community.
Now hold it, family, really quick. Now you see how he described being from a low-income community, if you will, or a working community, however he puts it. And he said he had holes in his shoes, but two parents in the home. So that's when we think of stuff like that today, it's like, oh, you must have a single parent, or see how he's talking about how solid that base was, even though they were in a community that was low income, they still had family values and they still had the two-parent household. Hold on.
Uh, had dropped out of high school, went into the military, and saw raw racism in Mississippi. Finished my high school in college, went to college, and came out and joined the civil rights movement after I went to University of Penn graduate school. But so I was active in the civil rights movement in Westchester, Pennsylvania. That's the home of Barrett Rustin. And I met Dr. King because people don't realize that the national leaders would come through and identify, help us raise their profile so we could. And I was working with the Urban League at the time, and the Moynihan Report hit. And it was met with consternation and resistance. First of all, I believe that Moynihan was wrong, and so was Johnson, in assuming that the state of the black family was determined by a legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. Facts did not support that. That one of our scholars looked at the records of slave records for 6 major plantations in the South at the end of slavery. 75% of slave families had a man and a woman raising children. 75%, and even though they couldn't legally marry, and they rushed to marry after that.
Hold it, family. Now, mind you, I'm gonna put the actual link in the chat, but he says something that was key. He said during slavery, 70% of those enslaved families had a man and a woman together. Even though they legally could not marry, they still were together and they were raising their children together. See, that right there is busting up a bunch of stuff. Sometimes when I'm hearing young activists and young so-called, I've been to college and I got a PhD and this is your history, they really don't be knowing your history. They ain't even talk to your elders who are now ancestors. They don't even know them.
And so so this was the state of marriage for 100 years. But when the Moynihan Report came out, I was working for the Urban League. Remember, there were several other trends going. The poverty programs were starting. And so that's when poor people became a commodity. 70% of the money spent on poverty went not to the poor, but those who served the poor. And a lot of the black leadership transitioned from civil rights leaders to black elected officials, and they were the ones running these programs in these cities. And so it was a major corruption, a source of corruption and distortion. And so therefore, I was at the Urban League, and Dr. Robert B. Hill, one of the premier researchers on the strengths of black families, published a counter report on the strengths of black families, and it was a bestseller, but the Urban League wouldn't republish it because it interfered with the racial dynamic. And then you had another trend that Cloward and Piven, who were sociologists at the Columbia University School of Social Work. And then their thesis was, one of the things that we should do in terms of addressing poverty is we need to flood the system with welfare recipients. That if you can separate work from income, school dropout rates would increase, drug addiction, all of the pathologies that you see.
And why would they want to do that?
Because they believed an income redistribution. They were socialists. They believed that the only true source of a solution to poverty was to have redistribution of income. And the way you do that is bankrupt the system. But they couldn't just do it. So they were assisted by the Black Power movement, who believed that the that the nuclear family was Eurocentric and therefore racist.
Oh.
I've heard Black Lives Matter say that. You're saying that that was part of the conversation even in the 1960s.
Absolutely. Then you got the women's movement who were denigrating men. So you got all of these powerful forces, but those forces alone weren't enough to tip it. What happened was the Office of Economic Opportunity, OEO, the government set up offices deliberately in the Black community to recruit people into the welfare system. Remember, welfare in the Black community prior to the 60s was stigmatized. No one wanted to be on relief.
I remember hearing that term.
So to overcome that stigmatization, they reinterpreted welfare as not social insurance and then as reparations.
And
so the wet cloud, and so
hold on, this OG is really bringing it, because I hear a lot of people who usually they be kind of Afrocentric, not all of them, right? And they'll talk about, I get the welfare, and this is my reparations. Funny to hear this elder say this. And now I'm seeing how even with the so-called conscious community saying that a man and a woman being married to each other, having children is a Eurocentric concept, like Black people can have family with a husband and a wife and children. Like, I just think I love elders who lived in a time period that lived and can explain it. I hate when people read stuff out of a book and then they come with their interpretation about how they feel right now when they never even lived in the Black community. I lived in the Black community growing up.
OEO, they recruited Black people, so millions. If you read Fred Siegel's book, from Manhattan Institute, this future once happened here. He documents this, and what happened is that the Blacks flooded into the system, 3 to 4 million in a period of just 3 years in New York City and Chicago, and at a time when the unemployment rate for Black men was only 4%. So it wasn't, and so what happened, that's when you saw the proliferation of out of wedlock births as a consequence of this change in power. So it was a combination of the denigration of the nuclear family,
wow,
the Cloud and Piven's basic thesis but then the government actively recruited people into the welfare system, and so you saw a proliferation of
that. Now do you all see why I wanted Bob to be here, to speak to that historical context? And one of the interesting things is, at one point, states obviously were able to regulate welfare eligibility, and many people have heard of the man in the house rule, right? That said that if the mother, married couples oftentimes were not eligible for welfare, but if the mother had a boyfriend who would spend a significant amount of time at the home, he was considered a substitute father. And in 1968, that rule provision was struck down. But what I find interesting is that the government had no problem playing the role of substitute father in millions of low-income homes. And I think that's what you're speaking to. So what I'm hearing from you is a combination of factors, policy, social, cultural, that started to disrupt family dynamics in the 60s.
And the ACLU came in, because one of the qualifications for welfare at the time, you had to declare the paternity of the child. And so the ACLU said, well, that's a violation of the privacy rights of mothers. So therefore, they abolished it. Also, social services no longer offered, quote, services, because having a baby was not a pathology. And so it changed that dynamic. I remember being, one woman at a conference said, I have 3 babies by 3 different men, and you are responsible for raising them.
Wow.
Paying for it, and said it in a militant, aggressive way.
Wow.
That's the mentality that it put in place to do that. But also adoption policies. Dr. Robert Hill, whose research everybody should read, The Strength of Black Families, just like with adoption. That's when they destroyed families too, because you had a lot of kids languishing in an adoption. But the kids who are come into the system, only 3 to 5% have any pathology. It's because they're parents. But as they come into the system and they move deeper, And they keep moving from foster home to foster home. There is a decline, a psychological decline, and the more the child acts out, the deeper the child goes into the system, the higher the reimbursement rate.
Wow. Wow.
And so when you have, they're saying, well, black parents don't adopt. Well, Bob Hill said there were 3 million children in America at that time that were informally adopted by the kinship network. Right. There were 3 million. 1.5 million were black. And so the question is, if we will informally adopt children when there's no subsidy associated with it, why wouldn't we formally adopt when there was?
Bob, you raised so many great points. Let me ask this question. So you gave.
Okay, hold on. Before this brother get to the next question, y'all need to. I put the link in the description box on Facebook. But y'all need to really listen to this. And let me just say this: I love when elders can explain to you what it was like in that period in time, because most of us really don't want to hear that, because we are making money off of black people being in crisis and not knowing who their child's father is, or having a bunch of babies by different people, or right now we are in crisis. The black leadership in the city I'm in, something has to be wrong with you before we help you.
Gave us a little bit of context in mid to late 60s. Can you speak to how the civil rights establishment handled the issue of familial breakdown, let's say from 1975, let's say through 1996 when welfare reform hit? So for instance, I know there was a CBS documentary entitled The Vanishing Family, Crisis in Black America, that talked about the breakdown of the family. This was in 1986. So it was an issue, obviously, that people were thinking about, but can you speak to how this issue either was or was not addressed by the civil rights establishment in subsequent decades after the Moynihan Report?
I mean, believe it or not, I quoted Jesse Jackson in the 70s and 80s, and I used to work with those people. Let me quote with Jesse. This was in 1978. Jesse said, our children are living in depressed neighborhoods or on the verge of ethical collapse. He further advises that morally weak people not only inhibit their own personal growth, but finally contribute to the politics of decadence. A generation of people lacking the moral and physical stamina necessary to fight a protracted civilizational crisis is danger to itself, its neighbors, and to future generations. Jesse Jackson went from that to condemning Barack Obama for his speech at Morehouse, calling men to be responsible fathers. And Jesse Jackson and the civil rights leaders tore into Obama, and Obama caved. He could have been a transcendent president, but he chose comfort over conscience.
That part right there was so deep, because I remember that. I do remember seeing the documentary from 1986. I put that also in the link there on Facebook. And that documentary really, I watched a lot of documentaries from back in the day, and it was just very deep. And I'll say this, I think he's going to break down why Jesse felt that way, how he went from black men being responsible in their homes. And sometimes when I'm in these internet streets, I hear black men and black women have these really hard conversations, or not even because they just kind of talk at each other. They're not really in conversation. They're very upset. And I feel like that's part of the basis of it. But if you have women raising sons and they don't know what a man really does, we just have a concept as women, and they don't have any viable man the way these men are here, then we gonna kind of get what we get, and you may end up with a couple of baby daddies. I don't know. But I like the way he showed how Jesse Jackson went from being this warrior, and don't tell me because he got older and he changed. No, you're gonna hear from another gentleman who was just as fiery. And when I hear these other ministers talk, it made me want to go to their church, because I felt their fire. You know what I'm saying? But anyway.
No, it's not gonna get me in trouble. No, trust me, John. I say plenty of other things to get myself in trouble, so you won't add too much on there. Okay. But you mentioned Jesse Jackson, and again, I'm going back to that documentary. At the end of that documentary, which started with Bill Moores asking a group of young women how many were married, none of them raised their hand, and asking them whether they all believed that a man was necessary to be in the home to raise a child. I don't think any of them answered in the affirmative. But at the end of that documentary, there was a young Glenn Lowry, a young Jesse Jackson, and a young Eleanor Holmes Norton who were speaking to this issue from a moral perspective. They didn't say, oh, we don't have enough resources, or they were talking about the moral issue of family breakdown. And to your point, it seems that over subsequent decades, that part of the conversation has been lost.
I'm telling you, we spent $22 trillion on programs of aid to poor. 70% of every dollar went not to the poor, but those who served the poor. Jesse Jackson and all of those others benefited from that. Right here in Washington, D.C., 19 members of Marion Barry's administration went to jail for stealing money going to the poor, but yet he was still lionized. So we could have done, I think it was at the time, the Black Enterprise magazine did a survey of income differences among the Black community. Those with $150,000 income went up 30% during a 20-year period, while those with $20,000 expanded too. So you have coexisting in that the largest income gap in America is not between whites and blacks, it's low income blacks and upper income blacks.
Boom.
If racism were the sole.
Hold it. I got to pause right there. When he said that, I know that to be true. The distraction that they give us is this white supremacy. No, it's the upper class Black people. It's the so-called middle class, highly educated Black people. They're the real enemies of the poor Black people, but we don't know it because we're hypnotized every time we hear a word racism, or we don't even investigate. Listen very closely to what this elder says.
Well, culprit, why are not all Blacks suffering equally? And it's always been a class dynamic that low-income Blacks on choice and education, they are supportive of choice,
yes,
leadership or not. Yes. And you can go right down the line. There's a huge bifurcation in the Black community where they use the conditions of poor Blacks as the bait, and the switch occurs when the money arrives.
Absolutely.
So in the minute that we have left, as an elder statesman, because I do think it's important. Obviously, the issue of family, we're talking oftentimes about the future generations, and that's important. But I think there's something to be said for honoring. The Bible talks about honoring your mother and your father, and your days will be long in the land. I think there's something to be said for honoring our elders. So as an elder statesman, if the heads of the NAACP and National Urban League and National Action Network and all the other civil rights organizations were listening here today, what is it that you would tell them to do as it relates to this issue of marriage and family breakdown?
Well, first of all, I think we need to concentrate on strengths. If you say 70% of parents are raising children that are dropping out of school or in jail, and that means 30% are not, why don't we go into the homes of the 30% to find out why they are successful and others are not?
That's right.
Also, I would tell them to stop whining about white folks for 2 years and address the enemy within.
10, but you give them 2. That's okay.
That we need to be concentrating on our strengths. Everybody who failed the success sequence isn't doomed to a tortured life. And so what I have found in my experiences right here in Washington, others, there are people who form kinship networks, a moral community. Kimmy Gray right here. 680 kids went to college from one public housing project because they formed a family.
That's right.
and sent kids to school. We need to, and then as a consequence of forming a moral community, many of those kids went on to marry, just like we did with the Benning guys. Mm-hmm. We intervened and stopped the violence. Many of these young men, once they became redeemed, the byproduct of that redemption was they married. And so we took some of them home with us, and we sat down with my wife and my children so they could see what a marriage looks like. And so we must do more than just whine about what the problem is, but we need to concentrate on solutions, and solutions of going to those communities. Nobody left or right or center ever goes into low-income communities and asks about their strengths and capacities and we need to do that. Go into the 30% of the homes where children are being raised responsibly to find out what is the source of their success, and let's take what we learn and apply it to the 70%. That's what the Woodson Center does.
Everyone, please join me in thanking Bob Woodson for this conversation.
All right, family, real quick, because I'm about to wrap this up. I put the link in the Facebook with a comment or whatever. This conversation, I put the full one because it's a lot. I'm gonna break this up. It's too much for us to sit and watch all of it, right? Because I'm gonna come back again with some more stuff. But I thoroughly enjoy this because this is part of the theory of why in Black communities, especially in my community here in Sacramento, why we have so many nonprofits and Black folks are not doing as well. Why 40% of the homeless are Black women with children. Why we focus on people who gangbang and kill each other up. Why are we not focusing on those healthy people so we can role model that out and figure out what are they using, what are they doing to have marriages and have it be successful? I think people have the right to do whatever they want to do. I'm not knocking that, but I also think people like this have the right to exist and to share that information, because no other communities is getting these messages for us to just be all the way we are. There's a root to this. And this brother right here, this elder, I thank him so much. And the brother that moderated, he did a great job. I'm glad they came and brought us that information. So please check it out. This is the Black Family Blueprint, a call to action. As they look at the Monahan report turns 60. I love the way he broke this down, because most people who are activists and who do all this talking, they don't research any of this. They go off of their emotions and feeling, but they don't talk to their great grandmama and how she left the South, or great granddaddy and how they left to look for better. They don't look at none of that. And why were they intact and now we're not intact? So anyway, check this out, family. Thank y'all for joining me, and I'll see you all again.